What's up everyone, I'm Dave Mech and welcome to a new video. And in this video I'm going to show you the Doctron instant mastering chain. If my camera is focusing on it, that is. There we go. The Doctron instant mastering chain, which is made in collaboration with Martin Stimming. I got this loan unit from him and to test out. It can be used in the studio as well, but for this video I'm going to focus on its use as a live device. For live, to get your levels higher, closer to what DJs are playing, because DJs are playing master tracks. So the price point is quite steep. The main con, I'd say, of this device is that the way it was marketed was kind of a mistake. Stimming kind of marketed it as a fix for the bad sound quality of the Octatrack, which stirred up some discussion on some forums. It was kind of marketed to be a, this is for everybody device, and I don't think it is. I think it's a very specific device aimed at people that play and perform live regularly and actually making money from music enough to afford this device and make use of it. This led to a lot of frustration for Stimming, I guess, a little bit as well on forums, people complaining about the price and finding it strange that it's so expensive. Actually not very strange, because it's one person building this and then another person testing it, and it contains only high-end, the highest-end circuitry possible. It's hand-built on demand, so if you order it, he starts building it. So it's very, I don't know how many they expect to sell, but not a lot, I'd say. So the price point isn't that surprising. Is it expensive? Yes, definitely. It is expensive. And now we're gonna see if it's actually worth it. With the unit, you get a kind of an instruction how to first set it up. The first thing you need to know is that it should warm up for about 30 minutes. So if you take it to a gig, make sure that you turn on your performance live set stuff before you actually start to play, and leave it on for about 30 minutes or so. And then it's warmed up. It's all analog stuff in there. So that's quite normal, really, for analog gear to have a warm-up period. And then the instructions state the way you should have your input coming into the instant mastering chain and how you can get the most out of it. And good to know, first of all, is how the chain is set up. So first you get your input signal into the instant mastering chain, then it goes through the EQ, if you turn it on, that is. Then it goes through the compressor, then a drive circuit, which is a transformer drive, and then to the output. Yeah, let's just dive into it and go through the options, and I'm gonna really let you listen to all the, how it compresses, and also how the EQ sounds, which I find sounds pretty darn sweet, really. The first thing we need to do is let you listen to a track that I'm gonna use for this. It's a track from a video that I released before, where I recorded a wind organ and used that sound to create a track with. And it sounds a little bit like this. And you can hear that it's a pretty dynamic signal that I'm gonna push through the instant mastering chain. You can also hear there's an intricate kick and bass combination. The bass is pretty punchy, like a kick. Now the question is, how is this compressor going to gel this signal? And how is it going to make it louder? Is it going to squash it completely until the point where it loses the transients and where it really falls flat? Or does it keep this groove? Or maybe enhances the groove even? You can see on the metering that it's now reading minus 19.5 LUFS. And of course the trick is to make sure that when I start using the instant mastering chain, we end up at the same LUFS, so we can A/B the signal to really hear what's going on. Because it's very important when you start A/Bing stuff that the original signal and the process signal are exactly at the same loudness, so you can really hear what's going on. If one of the two is only 1 dB louder than the other, our ears will tend to find, or our brains I should say, will tend to find that louder signal more pleasing. That's just how our brains work. So it's really important to make sure that the LUFS is exactly the same. So let's start. So you've heard the original track, and now what we're gonna do is gonna walk through the signal chain. So we get the input signal into the mastering chain. It goes through the EQ if it's turned on. Then it goes through the compressor and then the drive, and then it goes to the output. So per the instructions of Martin Stimming, he says to send a signal as low as possible, or not too loud, really, is what he's saying. So and to set the input volume quite low. So I'm just going to set it to -6 to see how that sounds. And I'm going to play this track. Turn this on. There we go. So we can hear that it's quite low in volume. Turn this off and on. Should turn the threshold to 0 so we can really get an idea of what's going on. So you can hear that it lowers the input signal by quite some margin, but that way we can drive the signal through the drive louder. So now we're gonna, the next step of setting this thing up is turning up the drive until it's obviously clipping. So you can already hear that it's clipping, and you can hear that this transformer clipping is quite nasty. It's not pleasing at all. So we want to make sure that that's not happening. But I'm actually gonna push it quite hard. I'm gonna set it to max, or around max, and you can set it to nuts, but it's really dependent on the input signal, how loud it is, of course. Right? So the next stage is to set the threshold. And when I lower the threshold, we should start hearing the clipping disappear. As you can hear, it's already getting less and less. But even at the lowest setting, there's still some clipping. So the next step, so I'm gonna set the threshold a bit higher, is actually setting the ratio higher. And now you can hear clipping is gone. We hear a nice compressed signal. So we have the attack and the release, and per the instructions, Stimming suggests 0.1 and 0.3, or on both the attack and the release. And I tend to agree, because on the master, most of the time I don't like to use very slow release times because it makes the sound a little bit dull. But the auto setting on this thing also sounds very nice, actually. And I noticed myself setting the release on auto. Because it sounds a little bit more neutral to my ears than setting it to 0.1 or 0.3. 0.1 and 0.3, it will sound very breathy, and on auto it sounds a little bit more neutral. And on the attack, I tend to find the 0.3 setting the best sounding. And you can see that the ratio on the lowest setting is very, very subtle. So it's more for transparent compression. I find the other settings more useful, and definitely if you want to drive, set the drive quite high, you really need to use the 1.2 at the very least, but you can actually push this ratio quite high and it still sounds pretty composed, right? So let's listen. So this is the, again, original signal. I'm gonna turn this on. Hear the difference. Set the threshold even lower. Now I'm gonna set the release time. Now you can hear that there's still quite a big difference between turning it on and off. So now we're gonna set the output level to match the LUFS. So we're grabbing this isotope inside again. So without we see that it reads minus 19.5 short-term LUFS. That's what we're going to focus on. And I'm going to turn on the instant mastering chain. I'm going to turn up the volume until it hits that 19.5. There we go. So now we can really A/B. See that when I turn it on, it first goes to minus 19 and then it goes back to minus 19.5, 19.6. This is the auto release time that is readjusting. So how much does it really compress? This is the question, right? So let's have a look, because for that to check, we have to play the original, of course. We're going to set the output to the middle, play. So to check that out, what we need to do actually is, again, I'm going to leave all these where they are. And I'm going to set the threshold to not compress at all. I'm going to turn the drive down and set the input to the middle. And now I'm going to, it's doing nothing, basically. There's no compression going on, or there shouldn't be any compression going on. And when I play this now, and I turn this on, I need to find the LUFS to match. So let's have a look at the LUFS meter. So without, it's 19.5 or 19.6, I think. 19.6, okay. Ah, there we go, 19.5. So I'm gonna actually turn this output. It's 19.5. There we go. So now it's again the same. A little bit lower. There we go. Yeah. Now I'm gonna start the compression chain again, so I'm going to start with the drive, turning it up until it obviously clips. You can hear that it becomes quite loud. So now clipping like hell, and I'm going to turn down threshold. Until it stops. Look at the LUFS meter. That's quite impressive, right? So the signal is now 3.5 dB louder than before it goes through this thing. So that to me is quite impressive actually. There's no peaks going through that mess with the LUFS reading out. So it's really fast compression that really gets all the peaks and goes through that drive signal to catch them. That's anyway how I think it works, because we of course have the attack on 0.3, so there are the compressor is letting through some transients, but then it goes through the drive, and the drive kind of chops them off in a very musical way. And this is the kind of the power of this device, is that you are really limiting in a way by that drive circuit, but it's really a pleasing way of compression, and it's quite heavy compression. I mean, if we listen to this again, an AB, in a way that both signals are as loud, so I'm gonna again set the output and turn this down. Let's have a look at the LUFS meter. I'm gonna turn this down until it reaches 19.5. There we go. And that's AB. Is some pumping going on obviously, but it is very musical. It's not like it sounds completely smashed. Okay, so that is that. I'm going to also briefly show you the EQ, which is I find very nice. And I'm going to explain a little bit about this button, which switches between feedback and feed forward. So this is kind of good to know what the difference between those two are. A feedback compressor uses the signal post-compression as a sidechain input to analyze how it should compress. A feed forward, however, uses the input signal before the compression as a sidechain input to analyze the signal. So the feed forward actually is preferable for live situations, because you really catch all the peaks. It's really fast compression, and it's really the way you want to go. The feedback compression feeds a compressed signal into the sidechain to analyze. So the more compression is going on, it will change the sidechain input to which it analyzes again. So you have really a feedback loop, right? So that type of compression is a bit smoother. It's a bit more gluey, so to speak. But it is not as fast as the feed forward thing. So in my opinion, I would use the feed forward for live situations, and the feedback you can use in the studio to kind of glue a mix together, for instance, as a glue compressor, which is quite nice. So that's also a thing that I noticed a bit about this device. It's the range on the settings are quite high. So it's not just useful for live situations. For live situations, the settings that I have here will probably more or less be the settings that you will end up with. And that works really nicely. For the studio use, you can really experiment and try different things. A good thing to know is that, as you saw, that the drive clips in a very nasty way. So at first you're kind of searching for that edge where it starts clipping, and then you dial in the threshold, and then you set the ratio higher if needed, and then you set the attack faster if needed to get rid of that clipping. But yeah, it's very it's a thing where you have to find an edge or a range where if you have a track that's a little bit louder, I mean, you should really have your gain staging in order. That's really important. But let's say that there's one track that is just a little bit louder, or during a live performance, you're using a delay that's going overboard a little bit. You really want to make sure that it's still not clipping, because it's a very nasty way of clipping, and on a big sound system, that's going to sound quite horrible. There should be enough wiggle room for you to go a bit overboard with your input signal without it clipping. So this is very important when using this device. You really have to make sure that your gain staging is really well thought out in your live setup. So there's no big differences between tracks you're going to play. It should all be very solid, and going through having the same output signal before it goes through this thing. This is really important. Last but not least, the EQ. Let's listen to the EQ, because I found this one to be very, very nice sounding actually. So I'm gonna focus on, I'm gonna leave the compressor as it is. And you can also see that when I start hiring the low frequency, it will become a little bit bassier, but it's also gonna influence how the compressor is working, obviously, because the EQ is before compression. So the high frequency EQ I found really nice. They're both shelving EQs as far as I could see with a spectrum analyzer. The high frequency shelving EQ, I'm pretty sure it starts around 3K. It could be 2K, but I think it's around 3K. It sounds very nice. So you can hear that this track is quite bass heavy. Now, pushing this through this instrument mastering chain actually made sure that, because it's getting compressed, the low end gets a bit less heavy, which is very useful in this case. But it still could use a little bit of brightness, in my opinion. So let's give it a bit more high frequency. Quite a big range, 14 dB. This is way too much. In a studio situation, you can actually use that in a creative way. But I found it to be very nice to set it to +3, maybe +5 even. Quite nice, right? And the low end, when I push it too far, you can actually hear that it starts clipping again, the drive. Also sounds nice and warm. So this is the original signal without compression. It's actually quite nice. I think the IQ is a bit too much now, so I'm dialing it back a little bit. And let's try 0.3 release. The cool thing is, if I go to the break of this track, here you can really hear that breathing. You can also see at the loudness meter in this break without a kick how much loudness we're getting. Quite a lot. So this is minus 24 LUFS. Oh, let's get back to the break. With compression. But it's really, you can hear it, how musical it's the breathing is. It's actually enhancing the groove in a way that I find very nice, actually. But it's quite heavy. So let's set it to auto and listen again to the break. This is why I like auto more. Still have that breathing effect. It's less heavy with on these settings. It's just a bit too much. It's also because I have threshold quite low, so there's heavy compression going on. But on auto it works and you get so much more loudness. Quite impressive. Let's see how it comes out of the break with that auto setting, if you can really hear it kick in or change. It's really smooth. It's just very nice. So that's it. That's the sound comparison. I already gave my thoughts on the price and the way it's marketed, so I'll leave it there. It works as advertised. It sounds incredible. It enhances my groove that I created in a pleasing way and ups the loudness by quite a big margin, -3 to -3.5 dB even, at one point -4 dB. Of loudness difference between the dry and the compressed signal. That's quite impressive. So it really helps in a live situation to compete with DJs running the signal into the reds on a Pioneer mixer. But yeah, so it does really help. And I'm gonna leave it at that. And I wish you a great day, and I hope you enjoyed this review and tutorial. Goodbye. Cheers.